Good evening. I'm Elizabeth Davis, president of Furman University, and it is my pleasure to welcome you here tonight to Safe and Free, Civil Liberties and the Fight for National Security. This is such an important topic, such a special evening for Furman, and such an impressive lineup of speakers for this two-day event. Welcome to all of you who have come from near and far to be a part of this program or to be in the audience tonight. Welcome students, faculty, and Furman alumni, members of OLLI at Furman, Riley Fellows, and members of the community who came to be with us tonight. And I'd like to give a special welcome to those members of the military community who are here tonight and with our great appreciation for your work to keep us safe and free. Thank you to the Riley Institute at Furman and the Department of Politics and International Affairs for presenting this conference. I also wish to thank the J. Kelly Sisk Fund and the Mayville Fund for their support. As Furman's president, I'm delighted to be a part of this event that showcases the intangible value of a liberal arts and sciences education and the tangible benefits that result. It's with pleasure and pride that I remind you that all 10 of the speakers tonight and tomorrow are graduates of Furman University. As you know, last year we launched the Furman Advantage, which connects a liberal arts education with immersive experiences outside the classroom, creating a personalized pathway that prepares students for lives of purpose, successful careers, and community benefit. And yet, tonight and tomorrow night's speakers illustrate that the Furman Advantage has long existed. If you read our speakers' quotes on the screen and in the program, you know that Furman nurtured their curiosity and gave them the intellectual tools and the ability to go on beyond a superficial grasp of issues to bring a nuanced understanding to complex issues. These accomplished individuals also benefited greatly from lasting relationships with mentors and from unique experiences, such as writing for the Furman newspaper or playing sports with a diverse group of individuals who expanded their horizons. There's long been a Furman advantage, and we're working together now as a university to build on that advantage for all our students now and in the years to come. Tonight, we will hear from General John Mulholland, a 1978 graduate of Furman who has had a truly distinguished career in the U.S. Army. I met John for the first time last night, and wow, what a career and an intelligent voice. We'll also hear tonight from Major General Chris Ballard, the commanding general of Army Intelligence and Security, who graduated in 1984. Dr. Jennifer Lambert, a 2001 graduate who is at the U.S. State Department and also taught here briefly. And Sheana Cavitt, a 2004 graduate who came to Furman, a pre-med biology major, and ended up creating strategies on how we can use science and technology to counter cyber and bioterrorism threats. We have a great deal to look forward to in these two nights. Now I'd like to invite to the podium one of Furman's longest-serving and greatly admired past presidents, Dr. David Schei. Dr. Schei, wait, I feel like, and yet there's more. Dr. Schei is a 1973 graduate of Furman. He left an indelible imprint on the school as a student, as a professor of history, and as the university's 10th president. He was an early driver of the university's emphasis on engaged learning, and it is his vision and leadership that broadened and deepened the experiences of thousands of Furman students, including several who are part of this symposium. We're delighted that Dr. Schei is back on campus teaching for us and as a part of the program. Dr. Schei, please come and introduce our keynote speaker.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and thanks to all of you for joining us for this two-evening symposium. There's more tomorrow evening, so I hope you'll make plans to come back. As Elizabeth mentioned, I am a former Furman president. That means I have the highfalutin title of President Emeritus. Now, you may not know that that word comes from two Latin words, which means to leave, and meritus, which means for good reason. Elizabeth mentioned that I've been teaching for the last couple of years at Furman, and this past semester, I was so impressed by the quality of the students I had the good fortune to interact with every other day. And one of my courses was a freshman writing seminar. And it was a part of the semester where we were focusing on poetry and short fiction, short stories. So one day I came in with a little bit of a surprise. I said, okay, put away all your books and your laptops, take out a single sheet of paper and a pen or a pencil. We're going to have a contest. And the contest is to write the shortest short story that includes the following four elements: religion, royalty, mystery, and sex. Did you get those? The students furiously started thinking, and then they started writing. And after 15 minutes, I took up the papers, I shuffled through them, and I said, we have a winner. And the winning entry read, "My God," said the Queen, "I'm pregnant. I wonder who did it." You should have seen the losers. A year ago, when the staff of the Riley Institute fastened on the idea of bringing back an exceptional group of alumni who had been directly engaged with the delicate balancing act between national security and civil liberties, they had no way of realizing then how timely that topic would be now in early 2017. In fact, I'm hard-pressed to think of any other topic that is so relevant to our national concerns today. Tonight, we kick off the symposium with a keynote address by John Mulholland, class of '78. When he concludes his remarks, we will be joined on stage by three other alums, Sheana Cavitt, Major General Chris Ballard, and Jennifer Lambert. And they, along with General Mulholland, will then engage in a lively conversation about issues of interest to you. In that regard, you will see in your program at the bottom of the first two pages, text your questions to 864-688-9368. So, as we continue tonight, as you are inspired by a question, please send it to that text address. Please also include your name and your Social Security number, because we're giving those names to the CIA. Now, your program includes compressed biographies of our distinguished participants. What your program does not say about John Mulholland's distinguished career is that he was born in New Mexico and raised in Bethesda, Maryland, where he attended Winston Churchill High School, a rather appropriate setting when viewed in the light of his later career. The oldest of 6 children of Irish Catholic parents, John was early on instructed and shaped by nuns at his parochial schools. His classmates were hard-pressed to see the ongoing significance of that relationship. At the same time, the military shaped his family gene pool. His father was an Air Force pilot in the Korean War, and 2 of his brothers are also former combat pilots. John speaks Spanish, German, and Arabic, and is especially fluent in the profanity of those languages. John, you see, has an Irish Catholic temper. When he finished his command at North Carolina's Fort Bragg in 2012, then Navy Admiral William McRaven called Mulholland a proud Irishman who is as stubborn as a mule, especially when it comes to providing every possible resources his soldiers needed to fulfill their mission and come back alive. McRaven added that he has a tough, hard, gruff exterior, but hosts the tenderest of Irish hearts. Truth be known, he concluded, John Mulholland is a softy inside. I'm proud to say that John and I have a lot in common. Softiness, perhaps. We both majored in history at Furman. We both played football. We both were in ROTC. We both married Furman women who grew up in Clemson, where their fathers were professors. And we were both lieutenants in the Army. I was a lieutenant. He was a lieutenant general. Until just a few months ago. There's a slight difference between those ranks. Now, for those of you uncertain about the hierarchy of Army generals, let me give you a quick primer on the privileges of rank. If I were a young Army officer and crossed paths with a one-star general called a brigadier general, I would crisply salute. If I were to pass a two-star or major general, I would salute with both hands. If I were to pass a three-star or lieutenant general, I would bow down with knees shaking and hope that he did not see me. So please join me in welcoming back to Furman that old softy, John Mulholland. Keep it in that vein.
Wow, okay. Where do we go from there? Okay, for anybody who out there is fluent in Spanish, German, or Arabic, the answer is I am not. Okay, so no tests on that, please. Wow, it's a real privilege and honor to be back here. I want to thank David, my friend here, for that classic, shy introduction. Thank you very much. I certainly want to thank President Davis, Dr. Davis, Jill Thiessen, who is here somewhere, who really is the magic, and her team for bringing this all together in the Riley Institute, for really putting on this magnificent event. And really, when you think about the role of an organization or a university, a great university like Furman, and as part of the community of our great nation, and its contribution to advancing knowledge and a common knowledge, this is an incredible event, and one I just really am very humbly appreciative of having the chance to participate in, because to be able to stimulate these kind of discussions with the people of Greenville, with the student base here, of course, is just phenomenal, and certainly paramount to the continuation of Republican democracy. And informed people and educated people from the very beginning of our republic was commented on frequently by our founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson in particular, about the criticality, the essential criticality of an educated population towards sustaining a Republican democracy such as we enjoy. So my congratulations, my appreciation to this great school, to the leadership that allows this to take place. And I'd like to ask you all to join me in thanking the school for hosting this thing, if you would, please. So as Dr. Shai mentioned, this particular topic could not be happening at a more opportune and appropriate time in our nation's history, with the inauguration of a new administration, still in its first 100 days, finding its feet. And virtually every day, you're watching play out in the news elements of national security strategy and all the challenges and dilemmas that come with the execution and implementation of national security strategy, or perhaps the lack thereof, and that's a legitimate part of this discussion to have, and what that means for the American people. And I would certainly argue that it is of profound importance to all of us as American citizens, regardless of where we are and whatever our roles are, because in some way, shape, or form, we are all part of America's security apparatus, whether we're contributing to the economy by the work we do, the people we employ, the work of our hands, whether you're in law enforcement or emergency services or the intelligence community, no matter where you are in the hierarchy and the architecture of American life, we all have a role to play in our national security. And I'm not sure we're used to thinking about that. We kind of tend to put that into categories of the military and the intelligence community, and maybe if we think about it at home, the law enforcement and FBI and things like that. But in fact, all of us have an incredibly important role to play. Our national economy is really the foundation of our ability to promote and expand our security environment. Our education, uneducated people, is without question a fundamental national security requirement. So very important that we have this discussion here. And of course, we're watching all the talking heads on TV, heads about to explode, at max RPM as they debate and opine and pontificate over what's going on. And all relevant too, but there's an awful lot of chatter out there and chaff to sort through. So what I hope to do tonight, and again, I'm speaking for myself, this is just John Mulholland up here, knucklehead Irish American, who barely got through Furman. I mean, one of the requirements I had is that there'd be no talk about transcripts, because mine is so deeply buried. I do not ever want that to see the light of day. So this is my sense about it. What I want to do is kind of hope to shape the discussion of national security and its natural tension and dynamic tension with civil liberties, which has been a part of the American narrative since the founding of our nation. The reason the first amendments, 10 amendments to the Constitution or the Bill of Rights, is because that tension was present at our beginning. This native distrust of government that many of our founding fathers brought with them following our successful revolution from the crown. I mean, it was that experience that shaped where we are today, right? So this is not unnormal to have this discussion about the role of security, vice, civil liberties. It has always been there. It is taking on new characteristics without question. And the speed at which some of these issues emerge upon us now certainly would be new to our founding fathers were they to appear here in front of us, but the centrality of the issue would not be. They would understand what we're talking about. The question I think is very important for us to ask as we talk about the role of national security strategy. How does America protect itself and advance its interests? It's not just purely about security in the sense of military operations or intelligence operations. It's much broader than that. We'll talk about that quickly. Or civil liberties. The question really is, how do we achieve the appropriate balance? How do we achieve legitimate, most acceptable risk to our national security and preserve our civil liberties? And that's what makes this so very hard. And it's the people who participate in these discussions overwhelmingly are good Americans, well-intentioned people who will come to this sometimes with very different points of view, and both of them are right and both of them can be wrong. It is truly a very wicked problem set we have, particularly in a world that poses as many deep and complex threats as the world around us does pose. I would like to arm you with a quote or a saying that one of the men who I greatly admire, one of America's great Army soldiers and general officers, Pete Schoonmaker, who's a career Special Operations General Officer, former Chief of Staff of the Army, is fond of saying, and that is, nobody owes us a 4th of July. So just think about that for a second. The 4th of July rolls around, you're having barbecues, fireworks, it's all rainbows and unicorns, it's all great. But nobody owes us a 4th of July. Our independence was hard fought and won by the blood of patriots against enormous odds, taking on the world's most powerful empire and the world's most powerful army and navy. And despite all those incredible odds, won that freedom and then preserved it over the course of our history. And that is still a requirement before us today. And paired with that, I would offer that the most basic civil liberty that we have to ensure we protect and preserve is a people free and secure from external threats. Because without that, and you can throw a dart at any dartboard of our map around the world where the conflict's taking place, and it is that lack of security that so terribly hinders countries from developing past the point of conflict and achieving true stability. So ensuring that our country remains free from the kind of threats and dangers that afflict so many of our fellow citizens around the world is at the heart, the first and foremost civil liberty that we turn to the government to protect. That's not to mean without limitations or discussions about that, but understand that, and we'll talk about some of those threats. So national security strategy, I don't want to crush people about that, but when you hear that term thrown about very broadly, and I'm afraid many people think of that very narrowly in terms of military strategy, and it is not. National security strategy really combines all the elements of national power that our nation brings to bear: diplomatic, information, economic, and military. And it's all those things that we bring together to form the kind of policies that inform how our government moves forward in the world space and internally to the United States, and how it presents itself to the world and guides us in how we should be prioritizing our resources, our assets, to achieve certain objectives that both seek to advance the interests of the United States of America and protect and mitigate us from the threats that are out there, and trying to find that very delicate balance of risk that the world forces us to deal with. There's not enough of everything to protect you from everything and achieve all the things you want to do. Just like you manage your budget at home, there's things you can do and things you'd like to do, and you can't do it all. We have to do it at the national. And that's when you hear that term, national security strategy, it is much, much more than just the military or intelligence dimension of power. It is truly inclusive of everything our country can bring to bear. And I offer you that because when you hear these topics discussed on TV and the issue in Syria or Yemen or the bombings in Egypt of late, we tend to very quickly go to that one space. And we do so at some risk because it is so much more than that. And it's important to keep that in mind when you hear about people talking about the power of diplomacy, the power of an economy, the power of information. All that goes into the idea of national security strategy. It's hard to do. It's very hard to do. I'm going to show you a slide. It is not an eye chart. Don't worry about reading it, but I want to give you a sense of the complexity that people in this space in our government consider as they try to wrestle with the challenges it faces. And you will see, or we'll talk about, most of those are not military problems. In fact, it's a relatively small subset. It gets a lot of attention for legitimate reasons, but it is a very small subset. First slide, please. So look at that. The point I want to make to you is its complexity. I don't want you to try to read that thing. But the range of considerations that professionals in this arena try to deal with, everything from changing climate, from drug trade, and the flow of issues from one continent to the other, all have to some degree an effect on our nation and on our friends and allies, as well as our adversaries and competitors. It's my only point here to make to you is this is really, really tough stuff. That's point one. And it's so easy listen to a talking head to see that thing reduced to a sound bite or a snapshot, and it is just so much more complex than that as we wrestle with that. And when you extend that to the discussion of, okay, now what does that mean to you and me as American citizens, and the discussion of civil liberties, very profound things, because there are the complexity involved with these issues. And they touch each other, they magnify each other, and they are not localized. And it's particularly in the information world that we live in, the world that you are so familiar with, these things literally travel at the speed of electrons, the speed of light. Okay, very, very tough, very complex. I'd like to speak a little bit about the range and complexity of the threat. I think it's important that we do talk about the security piece of this thing for this discussion, because that gets to the heart of the issue about, okay, how do we balance threat, mitigating the threat, and civil liberties? We deal with a range of potential competitors or hostile actors in the world today that I and many of my peers frequently are worried that the American people don't have a full appreciation for how serious some of the threats that we face really are. And I don't want people leaving here scared or thinking that Mulholland's calling for that the sky is falling on us all. But at the same time, people should understand the direness of the security environment that we face today. I do not know a single senior practitioner of this art who does not consider today's era to be the most complex and dangerous our nation, and the world for that matter, has ever been in. The most complex and dangerous our nation and the world has ever been in. That's a function of both the range of threats and the complexity of those threats, and how those threats both interact with each other, and today, given the advanced role of technology, how quickly some of those threats can emerge. And I want to talk about those briefly, not to crush anybody or to go through that in too much painful detail, but I want you at least to have one person's perspective of what the challenges the security apparatus of our nation has to deal with, so we can put into context some of the discussions that we come back to the issues of civil liberties. We tend to think in terms of the big four and one today. Those big four would be Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and the one would be a non-state actor threat, which today would certainly fit the bill for the entity known as ISIS, or Daesh, as it's frequently referred to in the Middle East, but the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, which is assumed the mantle as the lead Islamic extremist group from Al-Qaeda, which still remains a very active threat to the United States and to anything that it feels is not inconsistent with its ideology. Those are the big four and one is how that's normally referred to. Keep in mind that there are 3 countries in the world that have the unfortunate but existing capability to existentially end each other's existence on the planet: United States, China, and Russia, through the nuclear arms that we all possess, which are a legacy of the Cold War, but remain relevant to that deterrent model today. There are other nations, of course, that possess nuclear weapons of lesser capability, but those big 3 are the ones we worry about, because for the most part, the other ones are friends, fortunately, of the United States, England, France, to name those in particular. So those countries, that threat remains. The existential threat to the United States from potential adversaries like Russia and China remain real, present, and those threats continue to grow. Both those countries maintain very active programs to continue to improve and increase their nuclear arsenal at a time when the United States does not. And I'm not advocating a new arms race for nuclear weapons, but it's just a matter of fact. There are also countries that we would consider either peer or near-peer competitors across all the elements of national power that we've talked about: diplomatic, informational, and economic to varying degrees, China at one end, Russia at the other, but nonetheless they are actors in that space. And when we talk about the cyber dimension, which is fundamental to the civil liberties discussion here that concerns people in many ways most of all, we're talking about actors who possess extraordinary capabilities, certainly on a par with those of the United States, and in some cases, people would say perhaps superior to that. North Korea, very much in the news of late, a true hermit kingdom. run by perhaps the really true dictator in the world where power truly is centralized in the hands of one man who by certainly our standards would not be considered an individual fit to lead, but nonetheless is the president or the leader of that country, Kim Jong-un, who is, as we all know, has been very aggressively pursuing and has achieved nuclear weapon capability and continues to push to achieve true intercontinental ballistic missile capability with the avowed, clearly openly stated purpose of being able to hold the United States at risk with a nuclear weapon. Probably the single most dangerous threat of those big four on the planet because of the unpredictability of Kim Jong-un and his motivations. This is a man who's extraordinarily brutal, has subjected his own family members to the most hideous forms of death. You might imagine that if you saw it play out in the movie theater, you might think it was a bad science fiction movie, but in fact, it's all too real. And then, of course, we talk about the theocratic regime of Iran, who has always had a nuclear ambition. They see that as part of their deterrent model, both for the United States, but also for the Sunni states, because it is the center of Shia Islam, and there is an ongoing war between Shia Islam and Sunni Islam that plays out, certainly in the Middle East, but also other places around the world. So those big four offer those potential kind of threats in the nuclear race, as well as filtering out another kind of threats to us. And of course, there's ISIS, the offshoot, the heir apparent, if you will, to Al-Qaeda, that organization which attacked us so hideously in 9/11, and continues to be very active. If you've followed those threats on TV, Al-Qaeda in Yemen has reportedly achieved the ability to successfully smuggle explosives and laptop computers through state-of-the-art airport detectors, which is why you've seen the ban from certain countries of airliners being able to come to the United States with people carrying laptops on board with them. A very aggressive surviving aspect of Al-Qaeda who remain and have launched multiple threats. If you remember the shoe box, the shoe bomber, the underwear bomber, those were all threats that emanated out of Yemen and Al-Qaeda in Yemen. And then, of course, there's ISIS. And I think everyone's very familiar with the barbaric nature of that threat, who remains absolutely committed to achieving an apocalyptic clash of civilizations. Those are their words, as they move to establish and reinforce what they believe to be the caliphate that their interpretation of their religion has called them to do. All these threats are very real. Many of them manifest the same kind of capabilities that the United States has in our own arsenals that also requires us to defend against them. What I want to leave with you on that is perhaps we move on to thinking about how we can think about these threats as we talk about the issue of civil liberties, is the reality that there really are very bad people in the world who wish to do us harm. In some of these cases of these actors, and we haven't talked about things like international crime organizations, there's many more threats out there, there's one common denominator that kind of links all of them, and that's us, the United States of America. Because for each and every one of those competitors or potential adversaries, some of them are openly stated adversaries, of course, the one thing that stands between them and achieving their particular ambitions is the United States. Because of what we represent, the role that we play in the liberal world order that was established after World War II, that we have historically then been the leader of, and the world still looks to us for that leadership. We stand in the way of Russia regaining its true world power status that it so desperately seeks. This is what Vladimir Putin so eagerly wants. We are seen as a block to China's continued expansion and growth to what it believes should be its historic due as hegemon in Asia and perhaps beyond. And we are watching those expansion efforts play out and their very aggressive growth in both space and military programs. We are clearly the avowed enemy of North Korea, as our presence on the Korean Peninsula since the Korean War has been there to stabilize the peninsula and protect and help support our South Korean allies. And Kim Jong-un has made no secret of the fact that his developmental efforts are aimed specifically at us. And Iran, certainly since the Iranian Revolution in 1979, the United States has been the great Satan. We have been seen as their primary adversary that prevents them from achieving their own hegemonic goals and objectives, particularly in the Gulf, but perhaps beyond as well. Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, ISIS, and Al-Qaeda has made it very clear from the very beginning that we are also, for them, this Sunni Islamic extremist group, enemy number one. Now, of late, the Russians may have taken the role of number one away from us for the ISIS because of their role in Syria, so we might be fighting to get back our number one seat there with ISIS. We'll see how that plays out. But what I want to leave with you is this understanding as we talk about threats in context of where we are and how we protect ourselves and yet maintain our liberties. Make no mistake about it, we are faced with a row of potential adversaries, real adversaries, that mean to do this country real harm. Many of us over the last 15, almost 16 years now since 9/11 have had a chance to see our enemies up close and see what they're about. And I want to make sure I'm able to convey to you the seriousness of the threats we face, not unduly, but just to put it in context, because I'm afraid sometimes we might want to wish some of that away. And I just want to, if I leave you with nothing else tonight, I'll make sure you understand, you can't wish this away. Our enemies are real, they're aggressive, they're smart. Many of them are extraordinarily technologically capable, and in some areas advanced ahead of us. And they work feverishly every day in some way, shape, or form to nibble away, chip away at the security of the United States of America, to include in our cyber domain and cyber dimension as well. I'm going to bring up another slide here, and I'm just this as a way to think about it as you hear these stories play out, as you hear the security issues play out before you, just a way of thinking about the challenges we face as a people, because it's the way many of our practitioners think about this. If I could have the next slide, please. So this is those threats from that huge, terrible picture that you couldn't read, aggregated, so that people have a way of thinking about the problems. And if you can see this, we talk about the impacts of the changing climate. However you believe climate change is happening, the fact is it's changing. Things like the Arctic ice cap is melting. So what? What does that mean? Well, that means that ships can now transit ocean routes across the polar cap, shorter distances, save money, economically a productive way to move goods by ship. It means that the seabed of the Arctic floor, with minerals believed to be very rich in mineral forms, now will become another source of competition. So you've already seen Russia, for example, increase its military presence in the Arctic Circle so they can begin to stake out their ability to exploit these resources. It ends up with a military dimension to it, but the problem itself is not a military problem. Population growth, demographics, et cetera. But how do you think about these problems? How do we think about these problems? Next build, please. We think about these, and you see these bubbles on the left. Many of these problems have been with us since civilization existed. Some of them are new as a result of where we are as a civilized world here in the 21st century. But what has definitely changed is the speed at which these problems emerge, and the speed at which people have to make decisions, and the speed at which people have to think ahead about problems, because the emergence of these problems is so complex and so fast. The scope of the problems has never been broader. Everything from the floor of the sea to space, and everything that on the face of the earth is now part of the challenge. The scale of those problems, the depth and complexity of those problems has reached a level where managing them has become extraordinarily difficult. So when you hear people talk about these problems and almost flippantly give you solutions on TV, just rest assured it is so much more complex and troublesome than those sound bites would give you. Reach. No part of our country or the world is immune from where these problems emerge. You remember the Ebola outbreak. That did not remain localized to Africa. Very quickly, Ebola left the shores of Africa and began to travel abroad, or the risk of it was there for that virus to spread more broadly. And of course, adaptation. Our problems aren't static. They mutate. They are informed and magnified by each other. A smuggler's route who brings human trafficking smuggling from Latin America into America can easily become the route which a terrorist could smuggle in a radioactive device into the country. That's just business between the two of them. But you can take two completely unique sets of humans, malinformed or malintended for their own particular businesses or intents, bring those together to create a completely new and unique problem for the United States. So, as we think about these problems and what they're going to be with us, we think about how do we balance that with the civil liberties piece. And our discussion that will follow will certainly get into this. There's two dimensions of the civil liberties piece that I want to make sure you understand. Your brothers and sisters, your friends, your sons, your daughters, your father and mothers perhaps, those who work in this space are good Americans. Every day, thousands of your fellow Americans go to work across that realm of specialties that we talked about earlier, intelligence, law enforcement, military, et cetera, with the specific purpose of protecting the people of this great country. We have had a breakdown in trust between the American people and our government. And it has reached an imbalance, in my personal opinion, that is extraordinarily troubling. Because that, and again, I'm saying this from the point of departure where there has always been a natural and native distrust of government and the American narrative, legitimately so. And I think that's a healthy one, it should stay there. But there's a balance to that natural imbalance that I think has been exceeded, that I think poses its own grave threat to the democracy that we love. Because if we've lost the trust of the American government, which really means those men and women who populate that government, those men and women who every day work these incredibly difficult, thorny issues that I've tried to illuminate and bring to your attention, then we find ourselves in a true crisis, I believe, because without the trust, without the ability to marshal the powers of government, where most of our capabilities reside, I think we will find ourselves in an incredibly vulnerable and weakened state, certainly vulnerable to the actions of our adversaries, who are eager to build and exploit those fissures in our society and work very hard to exploit and create those fissures in our society. And that is not to say we should not be very scrutinous of ourselves and probing and demanding. Absolutely, we should be. But the trust relationship has changed, I think, significantly. And it certainly predates the Snowden incident, but the Snowden incident, from my perspective, an absolute act of treason against the people of this great country, has triggered another level of discussion where, in fact, in many circles in our country, he's a Robin Hood, prefigured as a hero, or perhaps an anti-hero because of what he's done, when in fact he has exposed this country to enormous risk and peril, as have others now, because there's been others since then, of course. Exemplary of this is the Apple FBI fight imbroglio that took place in the wake of the San Bernardino terror attack, when the FBI wanted access to data on the iPhone and Apple would not give them access to the code for that. And however that's a legitimate debate to have, but for me and people who work in the realm of how do I protect the American people, that seems that we are putting things ahead of the safety and security of you and your brothers and sisters and your children. And I think it fundamentally comes back to that trust question. So I don't have a solution for that, but I ask you as Americans who are part of this process to think about that trust relationship that must exist between the government that exists to serve the people of this great country and the American people. Because there is a dependency that we all have on what we ask the United States government to do in our name. And if I've been remotely successful here trying to tee up for you the dilemma, the dynamic tension between the real threats that are out there that seek to undermine us, to take us off our perch, to remove the United States from its position of dominance and articulating how the world does business on the international scale in terms of security, those fissures, those fractures among ourselves provide opportunity for that. And we should be able to, as any family must be able to, talk, debate, and fight within each other, and yet maintain that solid shoulder-to-shoulder front against the very real adversaries that are out there, because they are very much out there. So I will leave you just with this. Kind of the words perhaps that I alluded to by Thomas Jefferson beforehand, who said, "Above all things, I hope the education of the common people will be attended to, convinced that on their own good sense we may rely with the most security for the preservation of a due degree of liberty." So that was Thomas Jefferson to James Madison, I believe shortly after the Constitution was drafted. The important role that you and I all play as citizens, not as a general, not as an intelligence professional or a special operator, but as American citizens to this discussion. That we try in the course of our daily lives to have as complete an understanding of what's out there, to include those threats. Because if we don't have that appreciation of just how dangerous an environment it is out there, and the fact that today you're able to wake up, go about your normal business, come to Furman for this wonderful, important event, and not worry about your security, is exactly the end state we seek to preserve. There is a shorthand that we frequently use in this line of work to articulate the purpose of national security, and it's LLPH. And LLPH stands for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those wonderful words, those specified inalienable rights that our Declaration of Independence articulates. And so for many of us, LLPH has been our bumper sticker. What can we do to preserve life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for the people of this great country, and where we can, other peoples of the world who deserve the same. And that we do that with like-minded brothers and sisters, as we've done successfully since the end of World War II, and yet we're on a world stage that's changing so drastically around us almost daily. And we need to find that firm foundation that begins at home, as it always begins at home, and we are home. That's us. That's all of us together. To have these discussions thoughtfully, intelligently, and broadly, so that we, the people, can help ourselves understand what that right balance is and what risks we as a people are willing to accept, at the same time preserving these great liberties that we rightly so take for granted, but understand that they're perishable. They're only as good as the freedom that we enjoy from the threats around us. So with that, I'll conclude. I hope that was of some value. I do want to thank Dr. Davis and this great university for the opportunity to be with you here today. I wish you all the very best, and in this great university the same. God bless you all. Strength and honor.
I'm going to invite our panelists to come up on stage and join us, and as they're doing that, I'll pose the first question for you.
Shoot.
John, as you may have noted in the program, spent much of his military career working with special forces, and many of you probably know that that was the creation of John F. Kennedy in the early 1960s, as he and others envisioned America becoming more deeply involved in Southeast Asia and needing the capacity to fight unconventional war. How have the mission and capabilities of Special Forces changed since then? Here we go.
I would say that, and of course I'm incredibly biased. I'm incredibly proud of my regiment. I think actually one of the beautiful things about the vision of the men who created the role of Special Forces to deal with unconventional threats has remained remarkably unchanged, which is a testament to the vision that they had when they created this thing. We pride ourselves in being incredibly adaptive to thinking unconventionally about the threats around us, and that has served us extraordinarily well particularly in this current era. So certainly there's new weapons, there's new techniques, there's those new tools of the trade that come along, but the fundamental organizational ethos, operational ethos, and employment of our force, who are very busy to this day. In fact, my teammates are in Iraq and Syria and Afghanistan doing all those great things on behalf of this country, on behalf of you, remains remarkably unchanged. At its core, the tools change, but the why and how remains remarkably the same.
And I know we have a number of audience members who are keenly interested in this. Help us better understand the distinctions among the different Special Force units. SEAL, Delta.
You're almost daring me to call up my good friend down here. Very quickly, a primer. So the lexicon, the term of art is Special Operations Forces, and that is the umbrella term that encompasses how we in the United States consider all of our Special Operations Forces. The Army is the largest. The Army is about half of all of our nation's Special Operations capability, and that includes Special Forces, otherwise known as the Green Berets. The Army Ranger Regiment, or the Army's only Special Operations Aviation Unit, the Night Stalkers, which fly the great helicopters that conducted the raid in Pakistan to get Osama bin Laden. Army Civil Affairs, who are men and women trained to help restore civil society and help peoples in conflict to recover, and Psychological Operations, who help to do influence operations. My Marine brothers, the Marine Special Operations Command, one of my former brothers here, Master Robeson, commanded that outstanding organization, are the Marine Raiders. And that term goes back to the World War II Marine Corps Raiders of the Pacific fame. And they have a mission set very similar to Army Special Forces. Navy Special Warfare, of course, the SEALs. Who's not heard of the SEALs today? Impossible. They write books and movies faster than we can shoot our bullets. But our brother SEALs are fantastic, and they also have an organization called Special Boats, who, just like the helicopters in the air, the Special Boats teams are phenomenal sailors who help them with their infiltration skill sets. And then our Air Force brothers and sisters provide us with the great fixed wing, big C-130s, and Ospreys for infiltration and fire support. If you've ever heard of the spooky gunship, that's what they fly, as well as airmen on the ground who work alongside us on the ground, providing combat control of aircraft, rescue medics, and weathermen. So that is the U.S. panoply of Special Operations Forces, all of which have our own particular brand names, like Special Forces, et cetera.
Well, if you haven't guessed, here's the final follow-up to that. What really happened in the Obama raid? Osama raid.
I was going to say, I'm going to step away from that one there. The story that's out there is the story of what happened.
Well, as you know, several participants have claimed that they fired the fatal shot.
People are arguing about whose trigger pulled what. It's not a healthy discussion to get into. The fact of the matter is, though, a great injustice, a great crime. Some measure of justice was achieved against one of the premier criminals of our time. After an awful lot of very, very hard work by a lot of people in the intelligence community and special operations community. So anyway, cool. Thanks.
We have three wonderful panelists to join us now, and I want each of them to begin with a succinct summary or overview of how they went from sitting in these chairs in McAllister Auditorium as students to where they've ended up now. And two of these three I had the good fortune of handing diplomas to, so I'm especially delighted to see you back on campus and not in jail. Sheana, you want to start?
Sure. Sheana Cavitt, class of 2004. Was a biology major here at Furman, and I was told to mention President of the Student Alumni Council, so this is my second time up on the stage after giving a speech here, I think my senior year, so it feels a little different this time. After leaving Furman, I received my master's degree at Georgetown University in biohazardous threat agents and emerging infectious diseases, which means I look at the biological and chemical weapons threat, everything from intelligence collection against that threat through detection and response. I've also had the good fortune of being exposed to a number of other different threats, actually several that General Mulholland had up on his slide. So everything from cyber to drugs to a lot of things that threaten our national security. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Jen?
Thank you. I'm Jen Lambert. I was a 2001 graduate. I was a political science and history double major. I was a pre-law student. I thought I was going to go to law school, but in my senior year, I won something called the Mitchell Scholarship, and that took me to Ireland, where I did a master's degree. After that, I came back and worked for a law firm and discovered I did not want to be a lawyer, in fact. And in fact, what I wanted to do was to go back to Ireland because I kind of fell in love with that particular country. So I went back and got my PhD. After finishing the PhD, I worked as a media analyst supporting the Psychological Operations Task Force in Iraq, so I spent some time in Baghdad. Then I became a Presidential Management Fellow at the State Department, where I did rotations on Secretary Clinton's policy planning staff, looking at China, and then I covered the intel desk for Libya in the aftermath of Benghazi. I now am the Deputy Director for the Office of Analytics, which is housed in the public diplomacy family of bureaus. And so I do everything from survey analysis to focus groups to analyzing digital communications data. And so that work in particular does cross into this line of privacy, right? There's a lot of protections that we have at the State Department when we deal with digital data. But I'll leave it at that.
Hi, I'm Chris Ballard, 1984 graduate at Furman University. And I too was a pre-law major when I came to Furman. And my journey kind of started at the end of my freshman year when, in order to be able to come back to school, afford to stay at Furman, I went down to the basement of the library to the ROTC department and asked if they had any money. I was fortunate enough to get an ROTC scholarship and had planned only to stay in the Army long enough to pay back that scholarship. But in the interim, had a remarkable opportunity to see the world. My first tour was in Germany, was in near the Fulda Gap at the time when the walls came down, and at the end of the Cold War in the late 80s. And most recently, my last overseas tour, I was the senior intelligence officer for U.S. forces in Korea between 2014 and 2016 during the 5th nuclear test and a couple of missile launches as well. So we've been the gambit, 3 tours in the Pacific, 3 tours in the Middle East, 2 in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq. And I'm still on active duty, and the Army continues to let me continue to serve.
And before we move on, tell everyone about what you're doing now. I suspect that most people in the audience have never heard of INSCOM.
So each of the services provide intelligence capability to the larger intelligence community. And one of the commands that is there for the Army is the Army's Intelligence and Security Command. And essentially what we do is we provide intelligence to tactical commanders on the ground so that they can be decisive in combat. And we link them to the larger intelligence community so that they have everything at their disposal that they need to make those decisions. It's a pretty unique organization. We are in about 180 locations in 40 countries around the globe. The command is about 17,500 in all, about 10,000 uniformed personnel, 4,000 Department of the Army civilians, and about 3,000 contractors. A lot of those are linguists today that are serving with our troops in Iraq and Afghanistan. So it's a pretty unique command. Not only do we produce intelligence, but we synchronize the Army's effort with the other services and with the larger defense intelligence combat support agencies, and then we really enable others to do intelligence as well. So it's a pretty unique organization, and it keeps me on the road quite a bit.
If the audience hadn't realized it by now, we've got, of course, 2 senior officers from the Army, and they understandably still have limitations on their candor. So we want to be sensitive to that while at the same time probing and pushing and tugging them to reveal the real secrets. Chris, tell us about if there has been such an event or a circumstance or an issue that's arisen in your new work with INSCOM that has given you pause about the relationship between protecting national security and protecting civil liberties?
Probably a couple of things. First and foremost, what we're needing to do right now in terms of cyber defense has become pretty powerful in the last several years. And to the extent that we, obviously, to be a trained and ready force, we've got to be able to protect our own communications network and our own freedom of maneuver in combat situations. A lot of that is now moved to cyberspace and our ability to protect our own networks and our ability to communicate freely in what we call achieving information dominance. That's being challenged right now around the world by an awful lot of powers who have capabilities that could really keep us from having that information dominance and that ability to move and maneuver at will as we want to. So that's a pretty powerful area. The other, I think, is that certainly from an intelligence standpoint, we have done an awful lot of work over the years to try to protect the force from foreign intelligence capabilities. Counterintelligence is about protecting from foreign entities and foreign intelligence services. Of late, we're really involved now in a lot of insider threat concerns because we've had a couple of incidents at Fort Hood and other places where now it's not so much looking outside our formations, but how do we create security, resilience, and confidence in the folks that are in our force that may become radicalized or that may be influenced by things in the media. And so as much as we like to think that we have confidence in the folks that are in our own formations, we've got to create mechanisms to be able to know when we see something that's not going right with one of our individuals. And so turning our intelligence, and certainly in terms of civil liberties, to the place where we can protect the force not only from what outside, but in some cases inside, is something that's relatively new.
Sheana, while I go back and retrieve any text questions, obviously chemical weaponry has been much in the news in the last 10 days. Share with the audience that very complicated issue in the sense that it's internationally outlawed and yet groups still possess the capability and the delivery systems to use chemical weapons.
Yeah, so it's a very sad occurrence that happened earlier this week. And so for those of you who aren't aware of the Chemical Weapons Convention Treaty, many countries around the world are signatories to the treaty, indicating that they will not stockpile or use chemical weapons. The United States is one of those signatories. I will add that not all countries in the world have made this agreement. There are still stockpiles of chemical weapons as well as other weapons around the world, and some groups have them as simply deterrent mechanisms so that they will not be attacked themselves, and some people, as we've seen, have every intent to use them. And they are very nasty weapons. They've been around for a long time. A lot of the ones that have been used are not the worst ones that still exist in the world. So it's a scary time that this has come back around and that these weapons are still in use.
Jen, what's it like working at the State Department with a new Secretary of State who's had no experience in diplomacy or governmental work? Remember, your job is protected by federal law.
But they could reduce my salary to $1 now, right? So let me first start off with this is my own opinion and not the opinion of the State Department. But working in public diplomacy, like the whole goal of public diplomacy is to communicate about American foreign policy and American values to foreign audiences. And part of that is when you are Secretary of State, you are the lead voice of American foreign policy, and you're the lead face of American foreign policy. For Tillerson, who was previously the CEO of Exxon, right, his main job as concerns the media was to stay out of the media, right? He was doing a good job as CEO of Exxon if Exxon was not in the media, right? So being Secretary of State and his role with the media is completely different. And he's not comfortable with that new role. And so you saw, for example, I was discussing this with some folks Sunday night as well, but his most recent trip to East Asia, where he's trying to reassure a commitment to containing North Korea, that being the main message of his trip, it got overwhelmed by news of not being able to go to dinner with Korean officials because he was fatigued, which was not true. But as a consequence of not trying to own that discussion and be at the forefront in the media for the American people and its foreign policy interest, it creates that space that can come in and control that conversation in a way that you don't want. So we produced analysis in our office to show the Secretary's office that he lost control of that conversation, and that in fact trying to set the agenda and own that conversation and being in the media, whether you like it or not, is a fundamental aspect of that job.
Here's a question for any of you, and that is, why should the United States care about a few artificial islands in the South China Sea?
Well, I'm good here, I think. You guys, can you hear me back there? Yes, good. A great question. And if you were the four-star Navy Admiral who commands U.S. Pacific Command, it's something you wake up every morning thinking about. China and the Spratly Islands and the Paracel Islands. For those of you who've not followed this, China has undertaken a very aggressive, massive construction effort to some degree, building on existing islands. These little, there's nothing on them but rock and coral, and in some cases reclaiming soil from the seafloor and building islands in order to build a network of connected infrastructure to house fighter aircraft, attack aircraft, early warning radars, and anti-aircraft missile systems, and basically to erect a security umbrella. Of course, this is not how they speak about it. They speak about it as possible tourism sites. Enjoy that, please. I'm sure the diving's extraordinary. Which would then, from a Chinese national security objective, help create or make real, perhaps, that the South China Sea is in fact a China lake, a Chinese domain. One of the fundamental components of the liberal world order that we actually inherited from England, from the UK, following World Wars I and II, really certainly post-World War II, was the right to freedom of navigation. And that is that the right for mariners, for shipping, for ships of all flags, to be able to freely navigate the waters of the earth while maintaining due respect for the internationally recognized territorial waters that coastal nations enjoy. In fact, what we believe China is seeking to impose by decree, by facts on the ground, as we say, is to basically make the South China Sea a Chinese lake where freedom of navigation will increasingly become limited, restricted, and or dependent upon permission from the Chinese government. This extends to aerial navigation as well, because what China has threatened to do, I believe, in one case, I may not be right on that, but I believe it's happened in at least one case, is that they also would declare an aerial identification zone that requires incoming aircraft of different nations to declare themselves and their stated purpose. That is considered an infringement on the freedom of navigation, for the right for ships and aircraft to freely navigate the earth in space or on the surface of the sea in areas outside of those that the international community recognizes as territorial waters or territorial airspace. This would offend, in its worst manifestation, this would essentially force the U.S. meaningfully out of that part of Asia, and change the power dynamics, the international relationship dynamics between most of Southeast Asia, China, and certainly the United States and Australia as well. So it's a challenge. It's a real challenge.
Yeah, there's a global economic component of this too.
Oh, absolutely.
Because not only do we believe that there are some pretty substantial resources under the seabed in the Spratlys and in the South China Sea, but an awful lot of the economic movement of goods through those sea lines of communication rolled right through there for a couple of our big allies, the Japanese,
Yes.
the South Koreans, their reliance on foreign oil that comes up through those areas. And
Philippines.
so it puts some of our allies at risk in the long term as well.
And it's worth noting that we are not the only ones who see this. Vietnam, for example, who has claims to some of those same islands, but of course is very small in comparison to China, but is equally strident, at least internationally, in international forums, of ensuring that their claims are respected. So, you're in that kind of weird space where our one-time adversary during the Vietnam conflict, of course, is now, of like mind on this issue. So, but it is certainly, it is an example of the Chinese desire to establish a hegemony in the region. At least, that's our interpretation. They would see it differently, of course.
In my tenure as Furman's president, I participated in numerous audience question-answer discussion, and I felt that one of the great benefits from my point of view is that these sessions always enhanced my humility. And that leads me to the first question.
I'm going to leave now. I don't know where this is going. So.
If national security involves economics, health issues, education, religion, etc., why has national security leadership become dominated by military officers?
Great question. We should bring Mike up to help answer that. I assume the questioner is talking about the fact that we have Secretary of Defense Mattis is retired Marine 4-star, and you have Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster, and still an active duty serving Army 3-star as the National Security Advisor to President Trump. We can only speculate. At the end of the day, the man you have to ask would be the President and those around him. I believe it's because he has extraordinary trust and confidence in those officers to do the job that he's asked them to do. General Mattis, of course, is an extraordinary Marine whose service to the nation is well documented. If you put his rank aside, or the fact that he's a military man, he of himself is a man, and I happen to know him personally, and certainly happy to come to his defense here. But an extraordinary intellect, an extraordinary student of history, and an extraordinary student of conflict, and of course, by virtue, back in his uniform role, as a man who's risen up to the ranks of 4-star and commanded Central Command, understands deeply the workings of the Department of Defense. It is unusual. It's not unique. This has happened before, but it is certainly unusual. Fundamentally, we'd have to ask the President, but I believe it's because of the trust and confidence he has in these men. And of course, the Defense Department is defense, so there isn't too much of a leap there.
I think also something common to each of these leaders is they've established a reputation as problem solvers. And they have been in crucibles where they have had to solve very complex problems. And so when you think about the complex environment that the administration is looking at now, to see men and women who have had those kind of experiences and have got reputations as problem solvers, that makes them a little attractive, I think, for some of these roles.
I'll ask one thing. Let me just one real quick one here, just to give you some insight to how General Mattis thinks. He was one of the general officers who was on record publicly, while still in uniform, of conveying to the administration at the time that for every dollar you cut the State Department, I need more soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines. So this is a man who deeply understands the integrated nature of national security strategy and the critical role that diplomacy for example, plays, the economic power of a nation plays. He's a student of history. All those problem sets that were on that slide, the fact that most of those are not military, at least in their primary nature, General Mattis deeply understands. H.R. McMaster, another friend, deeply understands. These try to look past the uniform. In this case, these men are both men who are extraordinary students of history and the world around them.
Jen, the State Department has a role in helping the administration and the Security Council see the holistic nature of international relations.
It does, that's true. I think one of the things that plays into the military's favor is they've done a good job of communicating to the American public their expertise on these issues, right? So if you were to ask the American public who they trust on matters of national security and defense, it's going to be someone in a uniform. Diplomats have not done a good job of communicating that. We have not had a great relationship with folks on the Hill who make decisions about that kind of thing, and we need to be better at that. And I do think, to echo what General Mulholland was saying, our president right now privileges folks in the military for whatever reason, that is. And so he gets to make those decisions. And that's why you see our national security apparatus being kind of dominated by folks in the military. Now, fortunately, like with James Mattis, it's a good decision because he's someone who recognizes, as Mulholland was saying, how integrated our national security structure is and how diplomacy needs a seat at the table, Treasury and Commerce need a seat at the table, people from the NIH need a seat at the table, and from the CDC in terms of our national security. So we're lucky with that particular appointment, I think.
And I would add, I think the conversation has drifted a lot, especially lately. The issues that rise to prominence are often military issues. I mean, we just had the strike in Syria, and everybody thinks military. And I think we've lost, and the conversation has drifted away from understanding that these other issues are so vital to our security. I mean, look at the opioid epidemic that's going on right now and how many people are dying from these drugs. And I don't understand how that doesn't affect our nation and our nation's safety and security and drug smuggling and things like that. I think we need to turn the conversation back around to some of these other issues that are really crippling us.
Our next question comes from Aubrey, and Aubrey asks, what would you say to Benjamin Franklin's quote, "Those who would give up civil liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety"?
I'd agree.
Yeah.
Okay, next question.
The challenge is understanding what's
That's right.
there's nuance in that statement. Is understanding what's temporary and what's perhaps existential. And that's the rub, right? So we would all agree, with that, but it's a deeper thought than what the surface of it might imply.
Chris?
No, I would agree. I think to General Mulholland's point in his remarks, it's striking the balance. It's being in a place where we can pursue both. And I think a lot of folks are anxious today because a lot of the potential adversaries or those potential competitors out there who may not necessarily have the threshold, the standard of civil liberties protections to have to deal with that we do, that somehow we're disadvantaged in the world because we are beholden to an idea that means that we've got to constantly balance civil liberties against national security. And there may be some adversaries out there who don't have to think in the prism of civil liberties like we do. Yet at the end of the day, I think really that's our advantage. In a world of increasing competition over resources and a narrative of what we can offer the world, I think we're still in a better place because that's part of our character, that's part of our nation, that's part of what we bring, and I think ultimately it will be an advantage more than a disadvantage.
As two military leaders, have either or both of you ever had a situation where As you know, the United States military goes to extraordinary lengths to avoid civilian casualties. And can you share with us to what extent you've ever faced that dilemma in terms of either not trusting the credibility of the intelligence or getting mixed messages about what the target is and what might be there?
Routinely. As a combat commander, it's almost a daily event where you have to wrestle through those nuances and make decisions about what you'll attack, what you won't attack, even to protect your own force. It was in the early days in Afghanistan, it was almost a daily occurrence, compounded by the fact that our Afghan allies that we were working with did not necessarily love each other. You know, the history of Afghanistan is in many ways a history of inter-ethnic tribal conflict with each other, who band together against the foreigner, right? So the Russians were a lovely, opportunity for them to come together against, as was the Taliban in many cases as well. But that didn't necessarily stop rivalry. So we were frequently encountering instances where one ethnic group would come to us and say, "Oh, here are these bad guys in this village. Can you see them? They're Taliban." We learned very quickly we had to go, well, let's make sure you're just not asking us to take care of a problem you've got with that village because of you both disagreed over a well 200 years ago, because that's how long those memories last. So it's a routine part of a combat commander's life when you're dealing with conflict in and around civilian populations. It's normal. We routine it.
It is central to the challenge for intelligence professionals. Because oftentimes, the whole reason we provide intelligence to commanders and decision makers is so they can be decisive, so they can make decisions very quickly. And in a rush to make a decision, they want information that is precise, pristine, and clear. And rarely is the first report ever completely right. And so there's a constant struggle for us to be able to provide confidence to our decision makers that the intelligence we have reaches a threshold that allows them to make that call. And if there's ever a doubt that may cause collateral damage, then in my experience, we've backed away from that decision.
We don't do the mission. Sometimes our men have operated at increased risk because we won't provide that support. It's routine.
Now, Chris, I know you served in South Korea. Did you ever have a tour in Korea?
As a Special Forces Battalion Commander in Okinawa, Japan, our war mission would have been in North Korea, God forbid, and so we routinely trained in South Korea with our South Korean counterparts.
Well, if the media reports are accurate, in the last few days, President Trump asked his military advisors to give him what tools are in the toolkit to deal with North Korean nuclear weapons without sharing any top secret information. What would you tell him?
Well, there aren't many. This is a very difficult problem, and it's complicated by the array of actors that are around the Korean Peninsula, because it involves Japan, China, United States, and others all have interests in that region that influence that problem set. One of the more recent decisions that the Defense Department has made and is now playing out in the South Korean press is the deployment of THAAD, which is an air defense system on the South Korean Peninsula, which we believe will afford our troops on the Korean Peninsula a little bit more protection from this growing threat of more precise and missiles, the family of ballistic missiles that the North Koreans are developing. And so when you think about ways in which we can pursue technologies, capabilities that will make the threat of a nuclear a first strike or a nuclear missile strike from North Korea not a very valuable or a very advantageous option for North Korea. I think that's really what we're trying to provide the administration and our defense establishment. But that's not easy. The technologies are not completely there. And they're racing for capabilities that are going to continue to be dangerous, not only for the United States, but for the entire region. It's not just the intercontinental ballistic missiles that North Korea is advancing. They have made progress in all of their range of ballistic missiles that threaten South Korea, Japan, and others in the region. And those are friends of ours, and we've got to think about their interests as well.
I'd like to add, our problem with North Korea also extends to cyberspace. North Korea is a very capable cyber actor, and there was a story in the news a few days ago, and it kind of got buried a little, but that North Korea is actually hacking into banks in several countries and stealing money to put toward their missile program because of the sanctions that's been put on them. They're actually stealing money to bolster their nuclear weapons capabilities. So the cyberspace is a huge place where we have to counter them as well.
Of course, there's Sony.
And there's Sony.
Jen, the United States finds itself in the ironic position of trying to get Russian assistance in moderating the Syrian conflict and trying to get Chinese assistance to moderate North Korea. Are we having any success?
Well, the strikes in Syria recently have complicated that issue, right? Russia is now probably a less willing partner of ours in the fight against ISIS, and so that's complicated there. And in fact, Putin just canceled a meeting with Tillerson that he was supposed to have this week because of the strikes in Syria. We've also, part of containing North Korea is dependent upon China, right? And trying to influence China to continue to try to also contain North Korea. And so statements about China that are inflammatory don't help that situation either. So I would say both of those situations are in tenuous waters right now. And they require a very complicated an understanding of very complicated situations. Neither of these are easy, right? As you were talking about with the North Korea situation, and as we've talked about this week so far, even on the Russia situation. So they require a sort of delicate handling of affairs, and that remains to be seen whether or not we're going to sort of handle those situations with the sort of delicate understanding that they require.
I want to shift gears now and have you put on your career development hats, because there are a lot of students in the audience. I remember when in 1972, I received my acceptance letters to various graduate schools, and all of them were shocking in this respect. Each of them said, "We're delighted to welcome you to our first-year class next year, but by the way, we need you to know that there are no jobs out there for history professors right now." Now, you've all had successful careers in your chosen field. What would you advise a Furman student about mimicking the career path you've taken? What are the challenges? What are the opportunities? What are the fulfillments?
Well, we kind of had this discussion with dinner with some of the scholars this evening, and I think all of us would say that when we thought we really needed to think very hard about what our major was going to be, because that was going to determine the rest of our career path for the rest of our lives. I think all of us come to the realization that the major really didn't have much to do with it. It really was taking advantage of the liberal arts education that we received here and putting ourselves in a position that when opportunities did present themselves, opportunities that we didn't foresee, opportunities that we had no idea as college students might come along, that we were in a position to be able to jump into that opportunity and do well at it. And so I think the broad education opportunities that Furman provides, foreign study, I think many of us went on foreign study while we were here, all kind of contributed to that balance, that foundational layer that allow us to respond to opportunities as they presented themselves.
Before we move away from Chris, you need to know that one reason he's staying in the Army so long, how many years now, 31? Is that he's still paying off Furman tuition. Not for himself, but his two sons, right?
They both took ROTC scholarships as well.
Thank God.
Jen, you want to speak to that question?
Sure. I think first it's, just because you go into a PhD program for history doesn't mean you're going to be a history professor, right? You're going to be trained to be a critical thinker and be able to answer research questions appropriately. And that gives you, an entree into many different kinds of jobs. So sort of not thinking about the next step as putting you on a very narrowly defined trajectory, I think is particularly key. Right? If you go to law school, it doesn't mean you have to be a lawyer, but it means you have a lot of critical thinking skills, and that can translate into any type of career that you choose, in many different careers. You don't have to have the same one for 31 years, but it's great if you do.
And counting, and counting.
And counting. So think about your potential career paths in a very broad way, and I think that's at the heart of what a liberal arts education is about.
I would say, number one, find something you're really passionate about, because you will tend to excel in whatever that is if you're really passionate about it.
Rather than pragmatically trying to pick the major that's going to have the most jobs out there.
Right. Just because you're a business major doesn't mean you're going to make a lot of money. Number two, be your own best advocate. I've had several mentors along the way who have advocated for me, but at the end of the day, it comes to you and your own initiative and your own drive to advocate for yourself. So, and then the third thing I would say, and I've said this a couple times today, network, network, network. Meet anybody you can, talk to anybody you can, get advice from anybody you can, and take advantage of the alumni here. Get out there and learn what's available, because there are lots of career paths, I guarantee you, that nobody's even thought about, that you didn't even know existed, that you may fall into and think, wow, this is perfect for me. So talk to people, network, ask questions, and as we said earlier today, be shameless about it. Just go for it.
In fact, all of us up here are more than willing to network with any of you who are trying to use our connections to find a career. All we ask in exchange is 10% of your lifetime earnings.
Exactly. I would echo what Sheana said. Follow your passion. What is it that wakes, when you wake up, you're excited about? What is it when times are tough and there's storm clouds on the horizon that you're willing to continue to press through because you love it? And because nobody owes you anything. That may come as a surprise to some. Life can be tough, and then it's going to throw you curveballs. And I think you need to be motivated by passion, by a desire to see you through those hard days. So I echo what Sheana said. I choose something that you love, then pursue it wholeheartedly, relentlessly, until either a new passion emerges or you're successful.
I'm going to assert moderator's privileges and answer the question myself.
You have our blessing.
But it's not about me. Some people assume that this whole notion of following your passion is just a piety that's not worth anything in reality. But my son, who's now verging on 40, after he graduated from the University of North Carolina, informed me a few weeks later that he and some buddies who, like him, were all surfers and snowboarders, were forming a rock and roll band. And they were going to live on the coast of North Carolina and make music because it was their passion. I told him, it's not my passion for you. And I was the conventional, skeptical dad. And I was wringing my hands in privacy over what in the world is he doing? Does he have any idea how hard it is? There are thousands of bands out there that think they're great. And then, 2 years later, he called me out of the blue, said, Dad, guess what I got in the mail today? I said, a summons? No, he said, I got a check for $242,000. I said, well, I've given you a lot of money over the years. I said, where in the world did that come from? He said that unbeknownst to you, me, there's a very popular show on MTV. And because MTV is 24 hours a day, that show runs 6 times a day. And they've been playing my songs, and I get $1,000 every time they play it. And I said, does your band need a manager? So more than anybody I have ever met, my son has perfectly aligned his passion with his profession, because when he's not doing the music gig, he's a fishing guide. Go figure.
Go Tar Heels.
One final question from the audience, and they're getting increasingly partisan. What is the most appropriate response to the Russian hacking of our elections? Are diplomatic and economic consequences enough to deter continuing Russian interference with our democratic processes?
That's a great question. And I will tell you, it's a question that plays out routinely at the national security level. And that is how this new domain, this cyber domain, and we consider it a domain just like airspace, ground, in a security domain, environment. That's how we think of it. What does deterrence look like? What's the appropriate response? So these not necessarily about this particular incident of Russian meddling in our election, but this kind of topic plays out routinely. How do you consider this? If a physical actor from Russia came physically and intervened in our process, you could legitimately consider that an act of war. Intrusion onto sovereign space, physically manipulating an election. Is it an act of war if it's in cyberspace? I'm not going to provide any answer here, except that the author of the question has teed up a superb question that continues, I think, to baffle. Actually, baffle is not the right term. That we continue to struggle to find an appropriate answer for, because we haven't had a challenge like this since probably the onset of the nuclear age on which we came up with mutual assured destruction as a deterrent mechanism, right? Not a happy place to be in, although thank God haven't seen any mushroom clouds lately. Because the ramifications and the consequences of acting out in the cyberspace can be extraordinarily severe. The vulnerabilities that our society has to cyber actors are extraordinary. They're unfortunate, but they're real. That is true for most societies. And so it's a very incredibly nuanced and delicate environment when you talk about how you behave in that space. I'm a knucklehead history guy, but so I'm quickly getting out of my depth here. But this exact question plays out, I'm sure still occupies the minds of our senior leadership. How do you respond? And how do you appropriately messaging without triggering a domino effect that puts you very quickly in a very, very bad place? No good answers, but a great question.
Well, and just within the last 24 hours, we've learned that a Russian in Spain has been arrested at the behest of American authorities and supposedly has been directly involved with the hacking. Sheana.
So before I answer this question, I would like to say that this answer is of my opinion alone and not a product of the Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Lab. The hacking is bad. We, as the U.S. government and other entities that handle U.S. government information, are hacked constantly, and not just by Russia. All these defenses that we put up in cyberspace are ineffective at best. They are in our networks, they live in our networks, they steal our information constantly. In my opinion, the only way to battle that is by offensive measures. I think that we need to put things like beacons in our information so when they take it, we know exactly where it goes. Viruses, so when they take our information, it destroys their systems. I think the only way to combat this is not to sit back and be passive and, try to put up antivirus stuff, which does not work, but to be active. As we said, it's an act of war, and actually take some measures and fight back. And I think that's going to take a lot of changes in our cybersecurity policy, because people are very loath to get into this kind of, to participate in these kind of acts. But I think we're going to get there, and I think that's what it's going to take.
So often, of course, technological innovations move at a much brisker pace than laws and regulations. And that's what we're witnessing now. And I'd like to add to this ongoing question, especially with our two military veterans, what's going on with drone warfare, and where will that be 10 and 20 years from now?
Well, I'd like to go back to the discussion about the Russians and hacking with our election process. I would love to see, as an appropriate response, my fellow Americans double down on our democratic processes and actually get out and vote in the numbers that we ought to as Americans, to be able to prove that these democratic institutions are sound. In Australia, it's the law that you vote. You are fined if you don't vote in Australia. And yet we have relatively poor voter turnout in the United States. The Russians, if they are the authors of this, aren't really necessarily after picking the next winner necessarily, as they are in trying to discredit our political processes. And we can't let that happen. If we double down, we prove them wrong.
Drones. It's a feature of modern military life. It's here to stay. It offers, from a military perspective, the opportunity to both find, fix, and acquire and attack an enemy at minimal risk to American human life. That's not a man occupying an aircraft at risk and harm's way. It is a natural evolution of the automated battlefield. We are certainly not the only ones who use these things. Our adversaries are, we probably lead the world in our effectiveness and efficiency of employing the systems, but we are certainly not the only ones. Every actor today is almost capable of putting some kind of automated drone capability in the air. Tonight we could all become reconnaissance drone pilots if we put a GoPro camera on a off-the-shelf quadcopter and go fly it, right? You've now just become a surveillance tool. It's a fact of life. And the real challenge that we're going to be facing is with the continued mutation of technology, advancement of technology, as it also merges with other technologies, artificial intelligence, et cetera. We will very soon be having the discussion, in fact, it's taking place now. Russia, as an actor, is working very hard in this area of basically automating the battlefield with unmanned systems, ground and air, and undersea. So those science fiction events that were at once indeed science fiction are increasingly likely to appear as a feature of the modern battlefield. So we can bemoan it, but it's a fact of where technology is going to take us. And as artificial intelligence continues to develop its own capabilities, the merge of those two things really pose some interesting, not just law of land warfare challenges, but ethical challenges of how do we manage this as an international community. There is a body of law that deals with warfare. There are rules for war. And most nations of the world try relatively hard to operate within those. Not all, as we see in Syria, but most. So this is going to be a fact of life. Chris?
Yeah, even if you think about this from a non-military standpoint, the advent of unmanned aerial systems is emblematic, I think, of something that Thomas Friedman talks about a little bit when he talks about that change is happening so fast that our policies and regulations are having a hard time keeping up. And so if you think about the Federal Aviation Administration and the rules and policies that we have put in place in the United States to manage airspace, they are being challenged right now because this proliferation of commercially available, off-the-shelf, unmanned aerial systems. And we're having to rethink how we manage airspace in America because, and the change is happening so fast in the technologies that we're having to revisit it all the time. We're going to have to do this in terms of public policy and in a whole other realm of areas of our everyday life because the change in technologies is happening so fast. And we've got to be nimble enough to be able to address it.
I would agree with that. There are so many emerging technologies, and we're such a reactive society, and we have a tendency to institute policies and laws as a reactive measure. But we've got to get ahead of some of these emerging technologies. I mean, these fields are, like Chris said, moving so quickly. Automated systems, unmanned aerial vehicles. I mean, I'm a biologist, and I look at emerging technologies in biology, and one of my favorite phrases is the democratization of science, how it's just becoming available to anybody who has a computer and YouTube and can understand how to do these things in their garage. And we're going to get caught flat-footed if we don't understand what this means and how it affects our laws and policies.
I'd just like to add something that kind of ties these two questions about Russian hacking and sort of the advent of technology sort of together. And part of that is the importance of like civic education, right? Part of that is like hacking. The most successful hacks occur through phishing scams. They give you an email that tells you you need to reset your password for an email or a system that's classified or are sensitive but unclassified, as we have at the State Department. And that's how most intrusions occur. We have to become smarter about how we protect ourselves on the internet and how we protect the systems we have access to. And then with the hacking scandal, we have to become better consumers of information, right? We have to be willing to check up on the source of the information that we hear, fact check it, seek out alternative opinions before we start spreading it around, right? Just from a study of like social media, like 99% of shares of articles and information on social media, the person's never read that article. They just like the headline or the image and they share it, and they don't even remember where it comes from. And we've got to stop that, right? We've got to, before we go and share something and endorse it, as essentially through that share, we need to figure out what it's saying and where it's coming from. And the same with technology, as it's moving fast, we got to start having a robust public discussion about what we as Americans are comfortable with in the use of technology, right? Folks who are pushing us along the edge of technology faster and faster often are doing so and excited by the changes, and they're often very beneficial to society, but don't also start thinking about important questions about the ethics of that behavior or the ethics of that technology and what would the potential cost to our society be. And we have to have those public discussions now, just like we need to have a robust discussion about what security and privacy and how we want to balance that, right?
Dear audience members, we appreciate your attentiveness. This is a warning. I'm about to give you what's called a tease. If you thought this group is fantastic, tomorrow night we have a cast so much better than this crowd.
Truth be told, not hard to do.
It's a low threshold,
It's a
I
low
understand.
threshold.
We will have Admiral Mike McConnell, who was the head of the National Intelligence Establishment. So all of the agencies reported to him: CIA, FBI, DIA, gosh, there's so many I can't name them. We're going to have a 30-year veteran of the CIA who was a spook and began his career as a burglar at Furman University. You'll hear how that happened. I'm not going to give it away. We're going to have an excellent reporter from Washington, D.C., who has served with a number of the major news agencies and talk a little bit more about these difficult ethical issues we have between national security and civil liberties. And finally, last but not least, we're going to have someone who is currently working on a new supersonic passenger jet to succeed and excel the Concorde, if you may remember it. So stay tuned. Tomorrow night, this location, 7 o'clock. And now, if you will, join me in thanking all of our panelists.